morning and welcome to Do You Believe In? Continuing our series on religions that were made in America, today we're looking at the Church of Scientology. With me are two Scientologists who face questions from two of our regular panelists, Christina Reese and Mick Hume. Graham Wilson, straight away, what is Scientology? There's a lot of confusion about it. What do you believe your church is about?
Okay, so the Church of Scientology was formed initially in 1954. It teaches and practices the religious philosophy that was developed by L.ron Hubbard. And he basically devoted his life to researching into the whole field of the humanities. He had a scientific and an engineering background himself, and he traveled around the world a lot as a teenager and looked into Eastern religions, Western religions, technologies, all sorts. And what he found is that
He was mainly a science fiction writer, wasn't he?
No, he was a writer. Science fiction accounted for about a quarter of his writings. He was a writer in all sorts of genres. And the reason he did his writing was to fund his research, because he didn't want to be held down by any vested interest or any funding sources. So that's how he funded his research. But he looked into all aspects of existence and life and basically developed a whole applied religious philosophy, which is what Scientology is.
Okay, now you'll be as aware as anybody else that there is a feeling amongst some people that it is a dangerous cult as opposed to a religion. I mean, some people believe that. Do you believe in God?
Yeah, there's definitely an awareness and a belief in the Supreme Being. In Scientology, there's no dogma concerning it, and Scientologists go along a path towards a spiritual freedom and awareness, and they come to their own communication and their own awareness of who God or the Supreme Being actually is.
Okay, to just clarify that, so in a sense there's no God?
No, that's not what I said. There is definitely a
Supreme Being.
A Supreme Being, yeah, absolutely.
But not like, for instance, okay, in Christina Reese.
I mean, how would you define your Supreme Being?
Yeah, it is very much a personal thing. See, Mr. Hubbard, in part of the scriptures of Scientology, he isolated there are 8 different parts of existence, main parts of existence. And, these are going along paths of survival for yourself, through the family, through your group, through all of mankind, through all life, and through the physical universe, through the spiritual universe, and ultimately the Supreme Being. And the 8th, what's called the 8th dynamic, the 8th urge to survival is through a Supreme Being. And a person progresses towards that.
That's helpful, but I would like you to define a little bit more what is the Supreme Being.
Well, as I say, it is very much a personal thing.
Okay, how different is maybe, Graham, from, I suppose, Christina's Church of England? How different would be her God from your God? You don't have a God.
We don't have an anthropomorphic God, as the Judeo-Christian religions do. It's more, if you can compare Scientology with any other religion, it'd be more similar to some of the Eastern religions, in that you have a step-by-step path towards spiritual awareness, similar to Hinduism and Buddhism. And along that path, the person establishes their own communion or communication with the Supreme Being.
Is it a religion if there isn't a God? I mean,
Absolutely.
Is it a religion?
Well, absolutely. It's a religion, and all the top religious scholars in the world who have looked into Scientology have very much found that it is a religion. It deals with the spiritual being as the keynote of what it's dealing with.
Do you believe it's a religion if there isn't a God?
Well, I mean, if they define themselves as a religion, then I would have to accept that. I can't accept that. What I understand is that I would prefer to call what I understand is a system of belief. And earlier you just said that it was an applied scientific philosophy. Religious philosophy, and I would go along with that. I do have problems with it being called a religion, and even though the question's been asked several times, you still, God seems to be whoever you want to make it. There's something out there, which is an out there thing, an objective force or being. But again, I would have problems understanding how you could possibly say there is someone or a being out there. I don't know whether you'd call it someone or just a force or being, and not be able to define it a little more.
Can I say something on that? Scientology very much believes in that anyone of any creed can become a Scientologist and continue to believe in and practice whatever they may be, Christian, Jewish, whatever else they may be. And so we don't have sort of, this is God and this is what you must believe. Scientology just isn't like that, which is what's really fantastic, because whatever religion you are...
But that's like saying that you're Jewish, right? That's like saying you have your religion, but Scientology is something different. It's almost saying it's not a religion.
No, because Scientology, well, for me, it's something I sort of am striving to reach a higher spiritual awareness, higher spiritual level.
See, it seems to me that, as an atheist, that Scientology is in many ways the ideal religion for the 90s. It's
maybe it is.
Personal.
I think it is.
Personal-based, self-obsessed, self-help, counselling. It has all the resonances with our kind of modern counselling therapy culture. I think it's perfectly suited for the kind of Hollywood scene. I think it is entirely a religion for the 90s. But can I ask a question about that? Because can you explain your view on how people's problems in the present are related to what happened to them in the past, including in past lives? Mm-hmm. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so you have situations now, maybe, I have to think of an example here, maybe you have to, you have a situation where you can't deal with situations at work. If people come on to you and start giving you a hard time, and you just sort of go, you can't deal with it, right? Well, that's not necessarily based on what's actually occurring here and now. It can be from something that happened earlier, whereby you were physically hurt or emotionally upset, scarred, or whatever, right? And through the auditing procedure, which is sort of our way of saying counselling, the Scientology counselling that we do, you're able to get rid of those past moments, and it helps you now. It can do, and it's just up to the individual. Sometimes it can be based on something very much from this lifetime, and sometimes it can go to different lifetimes. You're not told you have to.
See, this is what I'm talking about, where I think that Scientology kind of perfectly sums up many of the problems with culture today, because that looking for the problems, the explanation for the present, what happened during the past, seems to me a complete kind of morbid preoccupation that we see everywhere now. It has many resonances with all the dangerous things like the recovered memory movement. And the central problem of it is that it's basically dodging responsibility for what happens to you in your life.
Absolutely.
Which is to say that...
Okay, let Graham Wilson come in on that.
It isn't my fault where I am today. It's something that happened to me when I was a child, or something that happened to me in the womb, or something that happened to me in a previous life.
Okay. Let me answer that, because I totally understand what you're saying, and that is what the psychotherapeutic, psychiatric view is, blame the responsibility on somebody else. Scientology is quite the opposite, because what you do in Scientology is when you're disencumbering yourself of past bad experiences and also things you've done in the past yourself, one of the things you do in auditing and in Scientology is you take a look at what you've done in the past yourself that may have harmed others, and you take responsibility for it.
That's what all counselling movements would say. And there's actually no evidence at all that any of that counselling helps anybody.
Okay, let me come back to you for 1 minute.
What it does is that you are wallowing in.
Yeah, well, we don't agree. I would agree that doesn't help. But in Scientology, you take responsibility for what's happened in the past, and the whole point of it is to remove the problems that were caused by the past, so you can live in the present. And a person progressing in Scientology, they do. In sorting themselves out, they take more and more responsibility for their fellow man. And you see Scientologists in all walks of life. We have all sorts of social betterment programs,
okay,
and that's the point.
Let me get back to your religion program, because we will get on to auditing stuff, because we might be confusing people at this stage. Do you have rules on morals within Scientology?
Sure. We have certain codes that we abide by. For example, auditors. Auditor is from the Latin audire, to listen. So, and the spiritual counselling is very much oriented towards listening to the person. But our auditors have a code of practice, which is very important in that kind of activity, obviously. In actual fact...
What are your morals? I mean, how are your morals code drawn up, for instance, for Scientologists? What is your moral code?
Well, I'll show you. This thing here, actually, is this is called The Way to Happiness, which is a code...
Keep it up there for a second.
Yeah, this moral code was actually written by Mr. Hubbard, and it's a non-religious moral code. And... it is followed by Scientologists, was also followed by many other people. The reason he wrote this is that he recognized that while religion has traditionally been the forum for a moral code, many people these days don't have a religion. So he wrote this, and most Scientologists abide by this, and it's based on common sense.
Just before I bring in the politics, I mean, the reason I think maybe it gets a bad name, you're quite secretive. And there are all these personality tests and e-meters and sessions, and I mean, people are confused. I mean, and most people fail these personality tests.
It's so funny. Scientology is so unsecretive, but people seem to pretend it is, or the media makes it appear secretive, or say we're secretive. You can go into any Scientology church and get any number of books and find out about it. You can go do free courses to find out about it. You can go on the internet now and read loads and loads of materials that Mr. Hubbard's written. It's even got a dictionary on the internet of all the Scientology terms, right? So it really is not secretive. You can go into your library, and most Scientologists are more than happy to answer questions. It's more other people afraid to ask.
Just to clarify before we go, Thetans, basically, you believe, explain to people what the church means, because Thetans is a very important concept.
Satan is the spiritual being. It is me, myself.
So we are all Satanists.
Well, yes, you are. It's not. You don't have one. It's not. You don't have a Satan. That's what you are.
Right.
You are a Satan.
But somewhere I was reading it connected the existence of Satanists to previous alien civilization. Can you explain?
Yeah,
that?
you see some of the rubbish in the papers. That one regularly pops up, and basically, the Satan. Mr. Hubbard discovered or isolated three parts of man. There's the Satan, the spiritual being, you yourself. There's your mind and your body. And the Satan, Scientologists do find in the course of auditing that they have lived before. They could have done all sorts of things in the past.
Do you all believe in reincarnation?
Not in reincarnation as such, because that has a specific meaning in terms of coming back as a type of animal or this kind of thing. But Scientologists who undergo auditing, and this is not something that they have to believe, this is something they find out for themselves, which is the stress in all Scientology is find out for yourself and think for yourself.
Do you believe in reincarnation for yourself?
Living before and living again, yes.
So you believe you lived before?
Absolutely. Yeah,
but if you don't believe in reincarnation as most people understand it, how do you understand reincarnation? Where would you have existed before?
Well, as a human being before.
Were you Graham Wilson?
No, you'd have a different name, obviously.
He is Graham Wilson.
I'm Graham Wilson in this lifetime. But this is something that people find, and you see this outside of Scientology as well. There's been various TV shows about people remembering having lived before and then going and meeting up with past relatives and fascinating stuff. And that's something Scientologists often encounter in auditing.
Explain to us about auditing, because you've mentioned it so much, people will want to know. What do you mean briefly by auditing?
Well, that is the keynote, that's the main spiritual religious service that we offer, is the auditing. And that takes a person from where they are, and it helps them address basically barriers to their full spiritual awareness.
I'm still confused.
Okay.
What is auditing?
Okay, auditing would be an auditor sitting down with somebody such as yourself.
You're an auditor, so a counsellor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go on.
So you'd sit down with a person. If you're getting auditing, you sit down with an auditor.
Right.
And you would basically talk.
Like a psychotherapist?
No, because the auditor would point you in very specific directions. And
so it's a directive therapy. You are told things you have to do to improve.
No, not at all. It is a lot to do with what's happened in your past.
How does anyone know that, though? How do you know what's happened?
All right, let me give you an example. Say you got this book here. This is the start of all the Dianetics book, which Mr. Hubbard wrote in 1950. And this book here describes how auditing works. Now, what happens is that...
But I haven't read the book, so
I'm going to explain
don't understand, how you know what's happened in your past.
Sure. Let me give you an example. Say that you've got a girl who has a terrific fear of dogs. Anytime she sees a dog, even if it's a perfectly friendly dog, she feels petrified of it. She gets a sore arm every time she sees a dog. Now, it could come up, and this would be something for her to discover, because whatever is at the bottom of it is at the bottom of it. She might find out that when she was 3 years old, she was knocked down by a dog and knocked unconscious, bitten on the arm, and there was various noises going on. Now, although she was unconscious, that's all stored in her mind.
And how do you access that? How would you understand that she was knocked down by a dog?
Well, through the course of auditing, the auditor would help the person recall that this had happened before.
Is it like hypnotherapy then?
No, absolutely not.
What's the difference between that and recovered memory syndrome, where somebody suddenly remembers that they were part of a satanic cult abused by their parents?
Well, because they don't. Because in this recovered memory syndrome, what usually happens is the psychiatrist will tell the person what happened, and they tell them so many times that the person starts to believe it from themselves, which is horrific. That's got horrific damage that's caused. In this, it's listening. You direct the person somewhat, but they go back and they, you might ask them to remember a time where they'd been hurt their arm if they got a sore arm, and they would remember it.
Right, though?
No, the person himself is always right, ultimately. It's his experience.
Just because I still think it's slightly confusing. Now, Lizzie, you are an auditor, right? If somebody becomes, if people are, for instance, in Christina's church, the Church of England, you go to services and you do things like that, and they don't have auditing. When does auditing play a role?
At any point. I mean, it's interesting, Graham's here obviously trying to explain something which, to be honest, takes years of training.
Because it's the keynote,
so there's so much to it, and then sort of put on the spot having to explain it all. But as an auditor, I'm not a staff member at the Church of Scientology. I'm me. I'm just a member of the community, and I go out and audit people. And
you listen and give advice.
I do. Well, I don't give advice. I mean, if I'm not auditing, if I'm not being an auditor and I just go to see someone to help them, yes, I can give them advice using Scientology, the writings of Mr. Hubbard. But mostly what I would do is I would audit them if there's something specific. Now, I mean, to give you an example, so let's deal with a real example. I have someone who I've been auditing recently, and they had, they wanted to improve their communication. And the reason they wanted to improve the communication was they felt it was holding them back with everything. So there wasn't a big problem or a big sort of being abused.
Like a counsellor, Lizzie.
Can I say something? Let me just finish. Just one minute. I may sound like a counsellor, and I don't apologise for sounding like that.
I don't mean it as a criticism.
But you see, what I'm aiming for with the person is not to sort of let's delve into their past and handle all their past. My purpose is to give them some spiritual freedom now, so that for the future.
Can you say about the e-meter?
Yeah, just give me one second. So that for the future, they can achieve things they want to achieve their goals, be happier, and handle their life better, and really spiritually be far more aware of themselves. A counsellor doesn't care about being spiritually in better shape. The e-meter is a device which is used in auditing, which is basically, it's a tool, it helps me, and that's all it is. I can audit with or without an e-meter.
What does it do?
So what the e-meter does is it registers the change in the body through the mind, seeing various pictures. So if you're in an area which is, let's say we're looking at relationships in an auditing session, you see, oh God, there was that relationship and he left me, and you're like, oh, it's all very, very emotional. You'll have a reaction on the e-meter which shows you, well, this is a hot area. This is the area that we need to look at and address in the session. It has dials, and it has a needle which shows.
How is it connected to the person being audited?
They just hold cans, and I don't remember what the thing is. There's a battery in it, but there's a very small.
So I think it's interesting, because for me, what Scientology does is it kind of combines the traditional irrationality of religion. Because what you're describing now, the e-meter, is a kind of high-tech version of what a Christian would use the cross for, or somebody else might use chicken bones for. There's some mystical power embodied in some article. So it has that traditional kind of religious irrationality, and the new irrationality of the counselling movement, and all the psychobabble, which is why it's very difficult to understand what you're talking about sometimes. And I think, if we talk about it simply as a kind of a spiritualised version of the counselling culture, which is what I think it's best understood as, and why I do think it's a modern religion. That does not help people, actually, does it? I mean, there is no record of counselling actually happening, because what you're actually doing is getting people to wallow in the problems of the past, many of which are imagined, if they come from previous lives, rather than actually getting on to dealing with the
Sorry, Graham.
Yeah, I understand why you're coming back to that, but I have to stress that it is very different. So I'll explain some of the key differences. I mean, one of the things is, in Scientology, we very much stress that you think for yourself and you have to find out things for yourself. So you can't really know auditing until you've studied about it, you've experienced auditing, and you've seen that it works or it doesn't work.
But why so much emphasis on the mind and psychiatry and counselling?
There's no emphasis on psychiatry at all. We're very opposed to methods of psychiatry, which are electroshock, mind-altering drugs, lobotomies, chopping people's brains out. We're very opposed to that kind of thing. And a key difference between the counselling you're familiar with and Scientology spiritual counselling is that in psychiatric type counselling, the person is told what's wrong with them. He might go in and see a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist is telling them the reason you have problems is because you're probably abused by your father when you were 3 years old. It might have nothing to do with anything, and it doesn't help the person at all, and actually can make them feel worse.
But do people fear, Graham, perhaps those who do Scientology, because you're more like a personality counselling movement rather than a religion?
Well, not to Scientologists, we're not.
No, I know, but to a lot of other people. Why do you think there is fear?
Well, any religion through history has been attacked, let's face it.
But you regard it as a cult, would you think that rather than
Absolutely not. It's a cult has the connotations of closed group. As Lizzie was saying, we're as open as you can get. We're open 7 days a week. There's 30,000 pages of information on the internet you can find out about Scientology.
I just have big problems with that, because are all the reports wrong about your headquarters near East Grinstead, where people are actually kept there, and part of what they go through to become a good Scientologist have to sit in a room, and I've heard of absolutely horrendous tales. Are all those stories completely untrue?
Complete rubbish. I worked down there, Christina. You're welcome to come down and look for the dungeons yourself.
Well, no, they weren't dungeons.
But there were reports of dungeons in the 60s.
Well, I haven't heard dungeons. I'd like to ask
Do you think it's a cult or a religion?
Well, I know cult is such a pejorative term.
Okay.
As a Christian, I have to say that I would probably, if pushed, call it a cult. But I would rather, being polite, Lithium Graham, I would really rather call it a system of belief that has a spiritual awareness. Now, in that sense, the three of us have more in common than Mick.
What do you think, Mick? Do you think it's a cult or a religion?
I don't use the word cult. First of all, as someone who comes from a Marxist background, I know all about being caricatured and about what you do and don't do. But I think the use of the word cult today is entirely illegitimate and very dangerous, because it seems to me that the defensiveness of traditional religion is such that anything which falls outside of it now has to be labelled as a cult, as extreme, as something which must be banned or legislated against. And it's a very interesting reflection on the, as I say, the kind of lack of confidence in traditional mainstream religion, that even a church as small as Scientology has to be built up into this major kind of cult and problem that we've got to do something about.
How do you react to criticism? I mean, you're regarded as quite a litigious group. I mean, you don't take criticism terribly well, do you?
Well, it's funny on that one. You get hit both ways on that. If you get an article in a newspaper which is full of garbage and you don't take legal action, you're told, well, it must be true. You didn't sue. Normally, we don't even bother to sue because it's such a hassle. But if we're completely libelled in the papers, sure, we'll defend our religion. We have the right to defend our religion.
And how do you react to people who say, well, you're fundamentally a religion based in science fiction?
Well, it's just rubbish. I mean, it's just an attack line. But Mr. Hubbard, as I said earlier, he was a science fiction writer. He was a professional in 49 different fields.
But whatever the religion is based on, and your system of beliefs, going back to this sort of being litigious and standing up for yourselves, I completely agree that people have to do that, otherwise you get walked on. Right. But what I don't understand is I have seen the document that Church of Scientology ministers have to sign an initial and sign on the dotted line. And it does not read like a document of someone who is being welcomed into a church where they
when you join the church.
Yeah, well, when you become a minister. And tell me again if I've been handed a false document, but a minister has to swear that they have not had mental illness problems either now or in the past, that they will not carry on friendships with people who have been kicked out of the Church of Scientology, that they've never had a criminal record. My understanding is that
then, is that true or not?
I'm not familiar with that document at all, to be honest. I mean, if a person has had psychiatric treatment in the past, that can cause problems because they have often been damaged by such psychiatric treatment. If they've had electroshock, it's actually very difficult for them to make progress in spiritual counselling.
But what kind of an all-encompassing, generous, sensitive religion is one that doesn't allow somebody in who says...
Oh, we absolutely do. It's not. I'm not sure what document she's talking about, because the person can still... Anybody can get help in Scientology.
No, but you were just saying that somebody with psychiatric...
I'm talking about people who are ministers, and there are these very strict rules and regulations that have to be signed. And when I read it, I thought, my gosh, this is a system of belief for people who are already perfect, who've never had any problems.
You're saying that doesn't exist, is that correct?
Well, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I'm not familiar with what it is. I mean, obviously...
You don't leave that document to become a minister, is what you're saying, the Church of Scientology.
You don't have to...
I'm not familiar with it. Okay. But however, to be a Scientology minister, I mean, that is a position of great responsibility, and to be an auditor, you do have to have good ethical standards. That's without a doubt, because we wouldn't have people being Scientology ministers who might be in any way a danger to our parishioners.
I don't understand what the fuss is about. No, I mean, the Church of England has its rules for vicars. I mean, the Catholic Church has, thou shalt be celibate. I don't know how more restrictive you could be than that.
There are rules and regulations, and the infamous 39 articles. But what I've seen is it goes a step further, where you have to promise not to sue anyone in the church, or the heirs of anyone in the church, and I find that incredibly restrictive.
I think we're discussing something that me and Graham actually don't know what you're talking about, so it's a bit
We've never done such a thing.
Yeah.
Are you ministers in the church?
I am.
Yeah.
In order to be an auditor, I am. No, not with those specific things on. But I'm not saying one doesn't necessarily exist. I haven't signed.
Do you both feel, just briefly, we're coming in, embarrassed today when you say you're Scientologist? Do you feel there's a reaction from people? No.
Absolutely not.
I'm often surprised. Like sometimes I would tell someone I've got a friend who's a GP, and I told him recently I was a Scientologist, and I was ready for the onslaught, and he said, "Oh, I think that's excellent." Okay. And I was quite taken aback.
Lindsay, Graham, Christina, Mick, we've got to leave it there. That's all for us today, but remember, join us next week when we take a look at Christian Science in the last of this series, and Do You Believe? For now, goodbye.